We need to make a group YouTube channel, by the way.
Yes, but we need a name.
We do need a name.
Turn on the mics. That's not bad.
I like it because we can be like Dan on the mic and.
Oh,
like
totally.
That, like for our little sections.
Totally.
Drew on the mic.
We should check to see if that's been done already. It seems a little.
That does seem a little, yeah.
Let me look. I am on the tubes of you.
I mean,
wow.
Obviously, no one's taken D3 McGee, so that's our fallback.
Always D3 McGee.
I don't like that one very much though, because it's
because you weren't in the original.
Well, no, not
I mean,
necessarily.
you're a D man.
It's just that like it doesn't lend itself as well to the solo stuff. I feel.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
when I say turn on the
D1,
mic,
D2.
there is nothing that comes up on Google.
All right, turn on the mic.
It is on.
No.
Fuck you! Damn, it is on. You can't do it again.
So we need to probably make a new email too, so we all get. We can.
Oh yeah. Turn on the mic.
We'll do that.
What email service? Gmail is just easy.
Probably that. Yeah.
Gmail.
Fuck Google.
They've changed the shit.
They're gonna take over the world.
Should we support some other giant?
Yeah, it's okay. They're all shit.
And they're all
All of them.
shit.
Everyone.
You need to look at Google's like company practices because yeah, they may be like data mining everyone, but they're like really fucking good to their employees.
Well, it's getting
That's
worse.
true. They're good to the like techs at least.
Yeah.
But that's mostly because it's hard to say why they're doing it, but it's hard
Probably
to say that they're doing it for altruistic reasons only because
No.
it's been proven to be more productive.
Exactly.
So.
I'm just kind of like
But that
hardcore against any monopolistic entity.
Oh, well,
no
yeah.
matter how,
It's always I think it's hard though when it comes to that kind of thing because it's like I think they do pretty well. They probably could do better, which would be good if they were informed, but it's also hard when they like I don't know, when they are doing like so much. It's like, okay, you're not allowed to go into like this sector and it's like, but we could do pretty cool things in that one. It's like, well, you're getting too big. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's how it should be, though. We can't have one thing that it's just like where everyone goes to do that, to access.
Well,
the
this
internet.
is where I think a really big like boon for the democratic co-op thing would be really good too. Because what do you think? Like, how do you feel about that? Like, what if we did have a Google that kind of like had like no
run by its employees?
Yeah, but it was all run by its employees.
I mean, that's way better for sure. I think that's actually a really good. So, like, I mean, it's a common thing where, like, when a company gets too big or too vital, a common thing in the past has been like, oh, okay, you bring that into public ownership, which usually means government run.
Mm-hmm.
I think an excellent alternative is any company that's too big or too vital, you democratize it and hand control over to their employees. I think that's a wonderful solution. I think they'd run it significantly more morally. But then that's still the question of, like, is there still a size
Well,
limit?
that's why I was wondering,
Yeah.
like, do you think that
Size
those... So I guess, like, that kind of gets down to the root of, like, why is there a size limit? Because, yeah, I think that it all, like, intuitively kind of makes a lot of sense to be, like, yeah, obviously you can't run everything, because then basically you're, like, a monarchy.
Well, so are we just asking what's the problem with monopolies?
I mean, yeah, Or is there any, like, remedy to that? Is there any, like, remedy to, like, what is it that actually makes a monopoly? Because,
Well, I mean, generally they find some kind of way to crush all the local competition, and then once they've consolidated the market, then they exercise their sole authority over that market to just hardcore jack shit up.
Totally.
They actively attack any competitors that come up that will challenge them with their resources.
So it's kind of like
they
that
pass
same...
laws to make things easier for them.
It's like the same idea as, like, the reason why we don't have monopolies is because, like, history has shown that when monopolies occur, they, like, negatively impact so many things.
Oh, yeah, and then especially, the worst part is labor. I mean, that's actually one of the things I wanted to talk about is I have stuff on Amazon. So, you know what, fuck it, let's just fucking...
What's what I was thinking about?
Let's do this thing. Okay, so we got Amazon. So, Bernie Sanders just proposed a new bill, and he's attacking Amazon, like, every day right now.
Okay.
It's called the Bezos Act. So essentially, what it would do is make it so like most of Amazon employees make so little that they have to get public welfare assistance. So things like food stamps, all that stuff.
Holy shit, that's insane.
And so Bernie Sanders is saying, okay, we have the single most profitable company in America.
Yeah, right.
The
Yeah.
richest person in the world. And we're essentially subsidizing this company
Oh yeah,
with
that's
public taxes so that they can pay their workers a starvation wage.
Yeah.
And so what his bill says is for every dollar of public assistance that your employees receive, you will be taxed an equivalent amount directly to the government.
I like that.
So just dollar for dollar.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really good way of, I think, also, like, getting to that kind of, like, universal wage, too. Because it's like, if you think about it, it's like, okay, so if you're not going to pay your employees, then the state will, and then you're going to pay for it anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you could just pay for your employees.
Hey, you want to lower government welfare? Then pay your employees better.
Exactly.
Go fuck yourself.
Exactly.
Dude, it's bad, though. So, like, during this thing, Bernie's been doing so good on this. So he's essentially reached out to Amazon employees all across the country, and he's like, send us emails. Tell us about your experience as an employee at Amazon. And it's crazy. I mean, so there's shit like, they have, like, little watches on you, and they track every move, like, every second. Whether you're going to the right place to pick up a package, how much time you're spending doing all these different things.
Yeah.
People are so afraid of going to the bathroom because, so anytime you interact with another employee or go to the bathroom, any of that, they call that idleness or idle time.
Yeah.
And if you use too much idle time, you get like a strike, and too many strikes and you get fired. And so there are literally employees who are peeing in water bottles because they're too afraid to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
And then there's like all this like really gross Orwellian language shit. So like the warehouses, you have to call them fulfillment centers. Workers and managers, you can't call them that. All people are called associates. And like they have like these billboards with like people in the warehouse, like a person like smiling with like a word bubble.
Yeah.
And one of the things on them is Jeff Bezos is an associate and so are you. We love working at Amazon. Yeah. We miss it when we're not here.
Oh
we're one big happy family.
Wow.
Yeah. And like if you're going the wrong direction to get a package, your watch will vibrate and like to get you back on track. Dude, it's just fucking gross. And it's like this is only something that can happen because Amazon is so big and has so little competition that it's such a huge part of the job market that people just have to work there. Yeah. It's the same with Walmart. They do the same shit. Not as bad with like these policies.
Totally.
But it's the same thing where like they crush local competition, they make you work there, they pay you a starvation wage so that they're essentially subsidized by the government.
Yeah, I mean like all of this is also just like kind of efficiency run awry too. Yeah. You know, like all of it is under the premise of like trying to make a company that is like the most efficient and the most profitable. But what it does is obviously destroy like any human rights.
See, and that's part of the thing with like where the democratic cooperative I think would fix that problem. It wouldn't necessarily fix the size problem. You'd still have an issue with competition, I think.
Right.
But at least with that, it's like your workers aren't going to exploit that position to make it horrible for their coworkers. They're going to vote to use the resources of that company that would benefit all of them. Which is better for the society because those are also your consumers and your citizens, etc.
The thing that I like think about, because like the whole competition thing, right? That's like usually it's like defended because it innovates. You know, like competition leads to innovation is kind of like that whole like I don't know logical like argument for it, and it's also like, but internally there would be competition too because it would be like I'm sure if you're all working for the same business and there's gonna be different ideas of what they think that would improve the business, and so they can be like, okay, well I think this, and then get a bunch of people behind them, and then when they have their democratic vote, it'll be there'll still be innovation and there'll still be creativity going on.
Absolutely.
So I don't think that that's necessarily like.
Well, and there's still competition between businesses, too, if it was a democratic cooperative economy. But it just would be not so high on the list that everything else is irrelevant, which is what we have now. It's kind of like this extremist, like, we will sacrifice anything for profit and productivity.
Exactly.
Our employees, the environment, the overall economy itself, democratic institutions, everything is, you know.
Well, and you wonder what it is that, like, they actually, like, what is it they actually value, too, at the end of the day? Because they're so, like, yeah, they're not...
Profits, baby.
I know.
Profits.
Well, but wouldn't that, I mean, in that idea, it's like, that would benefit the economy. They wouldn't be sacrificing the economy, right?
Only based off of the, you know, the prerequisite that wealth is circling back into the economy and benefiting everyone.
Right.
But I mean, as we see, it's pooling more and more.
Well, but isn't that like a...
And wages aren't going up, and it's no longer functioning that way.
Maybe this is where I wish I had a little bit more background in, like, economic philosophy, because it's like, I wonder if that's actually, like, you know, the circling of wealth. Is that, like, necessary for someone's idea of what a good economy is?
I think it is. I mean, there's a common... So I'm taking a macroeconomics course right now.
Okay.
And one of the main... Obviously, I don't know much. It's just one course. But
right.
One of the main things they talk about in terms of the health of the economy is called velocity of money, which is essentially like, how fast does money that goes into someone's pocket re-enter the economy and do something generative?
Yeah.
And it's almost like an exact line with... Like, the more wealthy someone is, the lower their velocity.
Yeah.
So they're just pooling
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when they say generative, did they, like, define what they mean by that?
Yeah, so, like, are you buying goods that then promote, you know, demand, which will then promote...
Totally.
You know, like, creating new businesses, creating new jobs.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, like, well, the other day I was talking to my friend Jason, who... He's a not a psychology, he's a philosophy graduate student in environmental and sciences. And we were, like, talking about it, and, like, the thing that came to mind was that usually with, like, these systems, like with the economic system and with money, I guess, in general, when you have something that is more, it's, like, removed from, like, a material manifestation, I guess. You know, it's, like, it's not, like, a one-to-one with resources.
Right.
It seems as though the whole idea is that you kind of abstract that like a material good into a dollar, and then you're supposed to use that kind of abstraction as a way to organize the rest of the system, so that, like, it still makes sense with the material realm, but that's, like, at the end of the day, that's the important part. So it's like when you, like, buy a good, it's like what you're doing is, like, you're buying food. And why do we need to have food? It's like so we can live, right? So that we can eat and not starve to death.
Yeah.
And so that's what the money is for, so that we don't starve to death. But when you get into this idea of, like, the profit margins or, like, stuff like that, you start working internally in that abstract system.
Playing with money instead of it being connected to real goods.
Well,
Exactly.
they have, like, stockholders that, like, every quarter they have to make more and more profit.
Yeah.
But because it's not localized, though, in, like, a material thing. It's not
tied to the real world.
Exactly.
The real economy,
Exactly.
which I think creates, like, these bubbles that pop because it's an illusion.
Exactly.
But I mean, that's, like, the biggest thing with this tax cut that corporations have done is buy back their own stock.
Right. I remember you saying
Just to
that.
inflate the stock price, because the CEOs make their money based off how high the stock goes up.
Right.
So, I mean, they're just playing money games. Nothing was made. Nothing was produced.
Well, that's why I get
they're
confused.
they're essentially walking into the government treasury and taking bags of money out. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Manipulating it to make more
Well, and
money.
it's not like it's even weirder than that, because it's not even like they're taking the money, because it's all through capital, right?
Yeah.
It's not even like they're actually, because, like, the idea would be that why do you have money in the first place, and it's so that you can buy goods, right? But instead what they're doing is just, like, taking money from, like, one bank account and putting it in another bank account.
And then it grows for no reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's doing literally nothing.
Yeah.
And so I guess I get confused with, like, the idea that, like, in schools they're teaching about velocity and stuff like that, and it's like, okay, but, like, where the fuck is that application? You know? Like, where, like, it's obviously not affecting anything, because it's, like, there's, that kind of stuff still happens.
You mean it's not convincing rich people to spend their money to
Yeah.
ways that go back into the economy?
Well, I mean, that would be the idea. That would be, I guess, the issue.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you're thinking that most of these people. So the premise underlying that idea is that these wealthy people care about the overall health of the economy as their primary goal.
Right, exactly.
I think most of them have an ideology mainly based around just their own personal wealth.
But I agree.
Which they think is like a healthy attitude to have, because that's kind of the ideology underlying capitalism, is that capitalism works best when everyone only cares about what's best for themselves.
Right.
You know, the whole Adam Smith, the
Totally.
invisible hand by each person seeking their own self-interest, all are, you know, benefited.
But I guess for me, I get confused at that because it's like, what arguments are they actually using to say that that's true, that capitalism is like a good economic system? Because that's literally what it's supposed to be.
Usually what they'll point to, from what I've seen, is they'll just kind of be like, look how much better the world is than it was 200 years ago. Look, capitalism has made things better.
Totally.
Look at the statistics of people coming out of poverty in third world countries and all that, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they point to the innovations of technology,
Mhm.
which have made life better for civilization,
Yeah.
as validating the existence of the profit motive as the central
Totally.
ideology.
And even that I feel like is too abstract because I don't think that even technology has a one-to-one relationship with like the material needs of like human beings and like the biosphere or anything like that.
Well, yeah, that has within it two underlying premises as well, which is that, you know, capitalism is the only thing that's going to develop technology in this way.
Yeah, right.
And B, that technology is being used to fix human problems at a rate that is, you know, acceptable.
Totally.
And I think we see with the climate crisis and various other things that is not the case.
Yeah.
And we have the technology to face these problems.
Right.
But capitalism is actively stopping us from doing so because
Totally.
of the moneyed interest. So
And
it invalidates its own arguments.
Totally. Which, yeah, to me, I'm always just like, why don't people just see that? You know? Why don't people just see that it obviously isn't doing what they're saying they're doing? So they're just like not being honest at the end of the day. There's something else going on.
I think a lot of them believe it. I mean, I'm sure there are those who don't, really just don't give a shit. But I mean, there was like that guy that we went to stay at his place, that billionaire, you know, he owns multiple companies and all that shit. And I mean, the way he was able to make it make sense to him is he just doesn't believe in climate change. He's convinced himself climate change isn't real.
Right. And that, I guess, is like, again, that... I mean, you can't just remove something from materiality and just like then kind of like live your life that way.
That's what he's doing.
I know, but what I guess what I'm saying is like you can't do that like ethically. Like it's not ethical. You can't just say you aren't hungry and then no bad consequences happen. Sure, you can do it for 2 weeks and then you'll die if you don't eat anything.
Yeah,
right?
We're just on a longer timetable where these people aren't going to see the consequences of their own actions.
Totally.
Or they don't care. I mean, I think a lot of these people are probably sociopathic.
But this is again, I think, where like that's where you have to localize it back in at like ethics, because again, it's like I think like the whole idea that I'm like that I feel is so like fucked up about this is that it's not like localized in anything that is actually like everyone can agree on as good, because like I mean at some points in history we're able to get together and be like, hey, like with like the Constitution, be like these are inalienable rights or you know something like that idea. And for some reason we haven't done that for like the economy, and we haven't done that for like materiality and stuff like that, which always confuses me.
I mean, there's been real attempts.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to understand in our history, there's been massive labor organization resistance, you know? And I mean, for a long time, corporations, you know, really ruled this country. There was very little government intervention. They just let labor and capital fight it out.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been watching this documentary about labor history in the United States, and I mean, it was crazy, dude. They hired private militias that would like spy on workers when they striked. These private militias would come in and just like beat them in the streets. Many of them died. I mean, shit like framing them, like they'd plant like explosives and then blame the workers' union and then get the government to send the National Guard to break up the strike. And it was crazy shit, dude. Well, Ford used to spy on all his workers 24/7 to see what they were doing when they're outside of work. and punish them if they were like organizing, associating with each other.
Really?
It was crazy.
Whoa, I don't know. That is crazy.
And then you have the company towns where, like, if you worked there, you had to stay in the town, owned by the company. You had to buy shit from the company store.
Right. Yeah. Which, again, see, and this is, like, I don't think that's necessarily bad. I don't think it's inherently bad.
What do you mean?
I don't think that it's, again, with the whole, like, monopoly thing. Like, I never, like, got to say this earlier, but we said that, like, historically monopolies have, like, led to negative consequences for all of these like different areas.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's inherent in a monopoly. I don't, because that's like the same idea of,
so you're
like,
saying there could be a good monopoly?
Yeah.
See, but this gets down to this basic disagreement we always end up having, which I think any concentration of power will always become used for evil in the end.
Right. And
even if it's temporarily used for good.
The only reason why I don't get to that point is because that kind of implies that we can't ever, like, be trying to work towards a greater good. So, like, I'll never...
I disagree with that.
Well, that's... I mean, to me, the underlying... Like, we haven't illuminated the, like, underlying issues well enough or the goals well enough, it seems like to me. Because it's, like, for a monopoly, if you have, like, at the bare bottom, like, this is what we aim for. Like, what do you aim for progress. Okay, That's not good enough. Don't say, like, that's not, what do you aim to progress? Like, do you, as a company, say you're going to make your workers, like, have less hunger, have less suffering, have better health, have these things? Because that's, if you aim that at that goal, you can always try to attain a better and better version of health. There's no, like, okay, yeah, everyone is 100% healthy. That's not, I mean, that will never be a thing. So, I think that if a monopoly, well, we'll say, if a company says those are their roots and they keep trying to attain those, like, goals, then you can lead to a better, like, a good monopoly.
But I don't think you're even talking about a capitalistic entity at this point.
I'm not saying it's necessarily through capitalism, right?
Yeah, it's almost like some kind of governmental institution.
Well, and I've always had a difficulty trying to see how people somehow divorce those two in their minds. Those systems...
Capitalism and government?
The idea that somehow those like, they're both group structures. Right. And then they like to say that they're not somehow going to be, like, run by the same laws. The only issue here is that, like there's, like, any social community is going to be run by certain, like, psychological and sociological, like, underlying laws. People have tendencies towards something. That's the whole idea of, like, social science, right? That's the whole idea that they're trying to figure out, is, like, what happens when someone... The fact that we can say, like, this is what... Like, why does a monopoly lead to negative things for all of these, like, places? It's not like that's a fact. There's, like, something there. For, like, the leader is, like, selfish. Okay, why is he selfish? Okay, well it's because it's a basic instinct.
I mean, so monopolies itself, only, like, the term monopoly, we're describing specifically a business within the system of capitalism.
Right.
That has eliminated all of its competition and is the only place for people to go for a specific thing. That's what a monopoly is.
Right.
If you're talking about, like, a concentrated institution of power as an idea, that's not a monopoly. Because monopoly is capitalistic specific.
I mean, I get that, but I also don't agree with that. I think it got there because of capitalism, but they don't run by the same rules as capitalism then anymore.
Monopolies? Well, that's the whole thing with why, we're not supposed to have monopolies.
Totally.
Even within, but they're a creature of capitalism. They came about within capitalism.
But that doesn't mean...
And it's a word used to describe a phenomena that occurred within capitalism.
Right. So what I'm saying is that if we say... So, like, there's, I guess, two paths here. Okay, capitalism, if it's, like, it can lead to monopoly, it can lead to monopolies. Okay, so what we can do is either say, okay, how do we stop monopolies from happening?
Right. Or
we can admit that the natural progression in capitalism is to create monopolies, and then we have to define what monopolies need to focus on if they occur.
Okay.
And
so
then work from there.
Our choices are either stop them from happening or find a way to make them a good thing.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, well that's an interesting discussion.
I think that sort of has happened, at least with like utilities, for instance, like the power company.
Right.
Because
Well,
Pacific Power has monopoly in the Pacific Northwest on power supply, and we just sort of regulate them heavily.
Yeah.
In the hopes that it will make it so they're not evil.
well, that is a really good example because public utilities are essentially something where we say this is vital
Right.
for everyone, and
Yeah.
so we're going to regulate the shit out of it.
And it makes a certain amount of sense to have it as a monopoly
Right.
at that point.
Right.
So
'Cause
that
it's almost
all one thing.
it's a public utility now.
Right.
It's like half government, half private corporation.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, then, yeah. I mean, if we're saying anything that becomes a big enough monopoly should become a public utility, that's an interesting discussion for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think
And that is a current argument happening right now because so like Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, they're all starting to do a lot of censorship right now in the wake of like concern over, Russian bot. Like right now they just banned Alex Jones completely. He's completely banned
Right.
off all these things.
right.
And this
I
is
agree.
at the government's behest, saying you need to bring this shit under control. It's kind of scary. I mean, we're not really talking about that shit.
It's
And
very
I mean,
scary.
Like these things. I think you can argue they're monopolistic. I mean, everyone goes to YouTube.
Yeah.
Everyone goes to Facebook.
Yeah.
And so at what point does something become big enough and vital enough? You can say these things are vital to the public discourse and democratic discourse. Does that mean we should make them a public utility? Is this the new public square? The amphitheater?
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Yeah.
so those are interesting questions for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it just seems as if that we still need to identify, like, why something should become a public utility that's not based on the idea that it's just become big.
Right.
Because whatever, I mean, that would be like clothing. Clothing's big. Should we all make, like, a one clothing company that is a public utility?
Well, I think it more means not that the product itself is big,
Mhm.
but that the corporations themselves have coalesced into such a large conglomerate entity that there's no longer competition. There's no longer it's kind of like a racket because they're able to squash the competition and determine, it's no longer in any way accountable to the consumers or the people because
Market.
the market. There's no
Yeah.
market accountability. They can just do whatever the fuck they want.
Well, and I think
I was just gonna say that has a huge thing. A huge part of that is due to the fact that the break-in cost in those industries is so high. So, for instance, YouTube ran at a deficit for years and years and years while they were building up popularity and buying server space and getting up all this stuff. And now, if somebody wanted to make another YouTube, they're so far in the hole that there's
Right.
no way they could compete.
Yeah.
Whereas in a clothing company, you can sort of just start making shirts, right? And
Yeah.
you can just sell those shirts on a street corner to start off, and it's not that big of a deal.
Mhm.
So I think it becomes different when the startup cost is so high like that, where there's just such a huge amount of capital that you would have to acquire before you could even begin to compete.
And I think that's where, I guess that's why, like,
Just want to get forks or something.
I think the difficulty lies with, like, a public utility in, like, that power is, like, that's not a very abstract thing. Like, you need power to be able to, like, I don't know, run anything in your house, right? You need water to drink, and you need, like, food to eat and stuff like that. But when you get to YouTube, it's really hard to make an argument that says that you need YouTube.
Okay. That's fair, but I think the route that Dan was talking about, as in it's specifically that it's vital for the public discourse at this point,
Yeah.
and it's become essentially a news outlet, and I think it should be treated more in that way. Although, the news outlets censor things all the time too,
But-
so it's interesting.
Totally. But I would say, okay, then what is why do we feel as though a news outlet needs to be a public utility?
I would say, I feel like they need to, because private companies aren't really beholden to anything, and so when the problem with like YouTube being a private company is that they're censoring things that they don't like. They're not necessarily censoring things that we've we as a society have decided should not be said. You know, like clear and present danger clause of you know, freedom of speech and hate speech clause, right? They're just censoring things that they don't like or that they think will hurt their mystique or their image, you know?
Yeah.
So when it's something that we've decided, like we decided just now, obviously it's not been decided,
Right.
that it's important, you know, to the public discourse or vital, you might say, then when they start censoring willy-nilly, it becomes a little scary because censorship is like the first step to an authoritarian state, you know?
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, a funny way to imagine is like, literally there's a bunch of people in a big public square talking in ancient Athens. And some business owners just come and decide to pull someone off a soapbox and take them away. You know, that's fucking, that's sketch.
No, right.
Yeah, super sketch.
Well, and I get, like, for me, it's like, I get that when we say things like, if a country becomes authoritarian, almost everyone will be like, yeah, that's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, and I get that this may be a long way of going about it, it just seems as though there's not, like, a clear argument as to why that is a bad thing, so that people can say why authoritarian governments are a bad thing. There may be some...
Because they deny people their rights. They become oppressive.
But this is all, like... I don't even... Like, that's a prediction. That's not a...
I mean, can you point to a single example of an authoritarian government that doesn't do that?
You're saying that authoritarianism isn't inherently bad, but that it's
I'm saying that
been bad in the past?
I'm not even necessarily trying to make the argument that what we have concluded, like, intuitively, or even, like, you know, through, I mean, you could kind of say experimentally, but I guess just through inductive reasoning on, like, past authoritarian governments. It would be, like, we need to find an underlying logical reason as to why those things need to be, I guess, like, not aimed for, or like, make sure that they don't happen. Because right now I feel as though there's so much wishy-washy into, like, opinion zone, where it's like, we don't even know necessarily what facts are nowadays, that it's like, we need to have a good logical reasoning that someone can be like, this is why we don't do this. It's because,
so essentially, like, re-clarify why authoritarianism is bad, define what it is, and why we should be avoiding it.
Exactly, because it's like, it's that same thing with, like, I think government too. It's like everyone's having an opinion on what they think the best government should be. And it's like, okay, but all of you are walking around with different premises. Like, you don't even have, like, you guys can't even have an argument. Because, like, you guys, like, think different, you guys, like, have a different idea as to what the government should do.
I like the word socialism being, like, a bad word.
Oh, I think that's even bigger confusion. People don't understand what they're talking about when they talk about socialism.
Totally. Well, and that's even a category within the thing, like, within the idea of government. I just literally don't know if people, like, I think so much of it is just intuitively felt. As, like, I am fucking pissed right now because, like, Donald Trump is president. And, like, I can list off all of these reasons why it's bad, but no one, like, there's so many other reasons that people don't know just because it's almost impossible to know. Because you can't live, like, the idea would be, like, for, like, I know this is going to be, like, maybe a little bit of off topic, but I think it's a good example. It's like,
I mean, this whole thing is just freewheeling. Fuck it.
Right.
We're just talking.
But, like, with the idea of, like, a transgendered life, it's like, we don't have enough logical reasoning to just say, like, oh, we totally understand why it is you don't want there to be gender, and why this would be a logical, like, idea to, like, create more genders or something like that. It's like, maybe someone feels uncomfortable about that, but it shouldn't even be a feeling-based thing at this point. It's like, if we're making a law, it should not be feeling-based. It needs to be structure-based.
I'm a little bit having a problem here, because I feel like you're saying we need to structure, like, people's subjective lives based off of logical, like logically organize people's lives. You know what I mean? Rather than just be like, oh,
I just mean
you have the free choice to live how you want.
I think you're
I'm just
specifically
saying-
talking about for making laws.
exactly. Well, in systems that we run by.
Well, what laws are you talking about in terms of like transgender? Just saying it's okay to be transgender?
No,
to
no.
define yourself in a certain
It would
way?
be like, well, so this would be, I mean, this is why I didn't think necessarily, I thought it was a good example in the idea of us not being, no one can, who feels very much either like a male or female, like, it's very difficult to put yourself in that, in those shoes. No one can say like, oh yeah, I feel what you feel. It's like, okay, let me like try to understand what it means. Like, let me abstract it to the
you
point
can only
where like
grasp at it.
I was bullied, and then maybe that is like about the same as you feel, and then okay,
Right.
I can see I don't want you to feel that way. It's just like, well, what is the logical reasoning for genders? What is that? What's that purpose? Because
and is it something we're born with, or is a lot of gender just
cultural.
culturally
so, but
pushed upon us?
the only reason why like okay, well now I think this is also a good topic to just like
They're all good topics.
I know. Well, to elucidate why it is, I think that we need to have a logical structure for the systems that we have in place. Because we do have systems that we have in place. Those need
So
to
are
be...
you talking about the cultural systems?
No,
like the
well-
norms and kind of like how we go about our lives in the culture? Or are you talking about
No.
legal things? Like you can only do these things,
Yes.
not these things.
Yeah.
You have to use these words, not these words.
Right. No, I would only, like...
Like, you want a legal, logical doctrine for some of these things?
I would say for, like, our economic system. That
That's
kind
sure.
of deal.
When we start talking about like transgender and shit like that, I really err on the side of, laws shouldn't touch it.
Yeah,
Everyone
let
can do what they
them-
want
Right.
and figure it
feels
out
right
within the
for them.
culture.
Well, the only reason why... But, so I think there should be a logical reasoning as to why that's the case.
Why we should leave it alone?
Exactly.
Well, my reason is, honestly, my thinking is very kind of like traditional American in the sense of like to leave as many things outside the realm of government as possible, and to leave as many things up to up for liberty and individual choices and just kind of like free cultural development as possible.
But again,
Because
I mean,
there's less chance for oppression that way.
so that's at least getting somewhere,
Right.
like, with the logical structure.
Right.
But, like, do you see how, like, I mean, we talk about, like, identity politics and stuff like that. It's like, why the fuck is there anything like that? Why is there any, like, I get that there can be, like, discussions about something, like, creativity, like, I don't know, creativity or, like, throwing out, like...
So you're saying, why are there identity politics?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a
Well, I
really
mean,
good segue.
Okay, yeah.
Here we go. Alright. So something that recently happened was the Democratic Party, under pressure from the burning wing of the party, passed a law limiting the influence of superdelegates. Okay? We all know about superdelegates from 2016. So what they passed is something saying that the superdelegates can no longer vote in the first round of voting.
Okay.
We'll get back to that in a second. That still leaves a window for them to have influence, but it's less likely now. In response to it, this guy, Don Fowler, the former DNC chair, said, "This change in policy will disenfranchise hundreds of people of color who are among the delegates." So you can, so within the superdelegates, he's trying to say that limiting the influence of these completely unaccountable party insiders in the democratic process is racist. So, I mean, you can see how the identity politics are used as a political weapon,
Right.
so...
But I just think that is purely rhetorical. Like, that's literally the only thing they're trying to do there is get people upset about something.
Oh, yeah, well, that's definitely a big section of identity politics.
Yeah.
Is
Well,
it's
that's-
used as a political weapon.
Yeah, the only reason why I'm saying is, like, why the fuck do we even have those isn't because, like, oh yeah, I don't understand that people try to, like, emotionally manipulate people. I get that. I'm saying, why are we, like, even having that be a part of, like, a discussion? That shouldn't be like, oh, I get that you're upset but can you please like elucidate why you're upset?
So you're
Can you
saying why
see
aren't politicians being logical in driving the discussion?
I mean, no, I understand that too. I'm just saying, why haven't we like
The
decided
people?
that that's not
'Cause
okay?
we're being effectively manipulated.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, I think one of the ways that we can be less effectively manipulated is if we do this. If we elucidate the reasons
Right.
as to what, if we have like a clear logical
Yeah.
reasoning as to like why we have a government and shit
Yeah.
like that, you know? It's like, oh, this is like, yeah, I don't know, like this leads to this and that's why we don't do
Yeah.
it. We just don't even do that anymore. It's just like, this is a thing, and they're like, I'm pissed at that thing. We shouldn't do it. And it's like, we haven't even thought about, like, the implications of it. We haven't thought about why we, like, the person might be, like, putting it up. It's just like,
Yeah,
I'm
dude,
upset.
I mean,
fuck that thing.
The population is pretty poorly educated and politically ignorant,
Mhm.
I mean, for the most part, and very effectively manipulated by those in power. I mean, that's the reality we're in. So
Right.
obviously, I agree with you that people should be discussing these things in a substantive way and challenging preconceptions and all that, but, I mean, that's just hard work. I don't think you're going to get everyone to sit down around a table and have this conversation patiently
real.
and methodically.
No, but this
it's going to
is-
be, you know, individuals and groups that are just constantly throwing these questions out there and forcing dialogue to happen.
The only reason why I say that is, like, that's both true and not true is, like, I think that there will always be the people who do want to have these kind of discussions and stuff like that, but the whole idea is to move forward. Like, this kind of shit probably was not being talked about in Greece. I don't even think we're, like, near to where they were. They were talking about science and, like, how to apply a lot of like, scientific works in their discussions.
Yeah,
And
there
we're
was a
not
lot
even
of
at-
bullshit, too. There
I'm
was
sure.
a lot of, you know, misdirection and, you know, being manipulated by public figures for
Right.
their own purposes.
And I'm not even saying they necessarily had the best way of doing it, but I'm saying
But I agree that it was
this.
better.
But this is a way that I think you can get closer to a best way of doing it, is to not even, like, we don't need to keep having the same discussions all the time because some discussions have been had, and so as long as you can, like,
Right.
clearly say, like, this is why we do this, and if you as a person can go through and, like, you read that argument and say, I think this is wrong, and then I want to experimentally show that this is wrong, and then we need to change that premise, great, but not need to, like, go through and be like, oh yeah, maybe we should talk about why monopolies are bad again. Everyone should be able to read that in their education and be like, that is a thing that is fucked up, we don't do that.
But that's how it gets back to the problem with concentrated power. Because, I mean, you know, these conversations are kept within certain boxes because those in power don't want you to question certain things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't want us in school really diving into the nitty-gritty of the pros and cons of capitalism.
Right.
You know, that's
Yeah,
not
but
something we do.
Kinda, like, this is where I just say, fuck them. I don't care what they want. It's like, we have to, like, the whole idea of the
So you
democracy.
mean take our country back from those in power?
Well,
Yeah,
the whole
okay,
idea of
I'm
the,
with you.
I mean, just use...
I'll go get my pitchfork.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Well, use your, like, I'm saying for your own personal life, too. Like, use that kind of idea effectively. Like, talk to, like, if you, like, something I could do is just structure my own, like, go and get an education degree and structure a fucking school that way. And be like, I'm gonna make a school where that's how it's done.
You have to deal with, like, all the accreditation problems.
See, but yeah,
I mean,
that's,
I get that. I get that.
It's tough. They stack the system so that those within the club can do that shit, and those outside have a really hard fucking time.
Right.
You feel like that's true? Even
Absolutely.
with Waldorf classes and stuff like that? Like with all of those different
I'm talking,
homeschooling
like,
kind of things?
For the average person to start a class that gets any kind of real, you know, following, I think that's very difficult. I mean, do you disagree?
Well,
Without
I mean,
money.
I think it's a difficult
There's
place
like
to
the
start.
School of Life on YouTube.
That's true.
Yeah, it's just a group of people.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Well,
it's
that's
easier
an
now than it
interesting
used to be.
segue back into what we were talking about with, like, YouTube censoring things. You know, what if
Yeah.
classes
That's
like
where it's
that,
scary.
you know, classes about how to rebel against the government or how to, you know, effectively maintain free thought and, you know,
Yeah.
the health of our democracy. What if that starts getting banned?
Mhm.
You know, it's like that's why I think it's important to have some sort of limitation on those entities that have become so important to actual, like the discourse of our so-called democracy.
I completely agree, and that was like one of the really disturbing things when YouTube posted its like policies for like why it's taking certain people down. And I mean, they've essentially left it open for anything. Like some of the things they said was low quality. Another one was sowing discontent. Discontent.
Yeah. What?
Discontent. I mean, that's saying don't fucking complain.
Yeah,
that's
right.
like Orwellian as shit. That's scary. And I mean, Google's very much part of this too. I mean, this happened before this current wave. But after the 2016 election, Google folded to government pressure, and they changed their algorithms to push people away from anything that's like counter-narrative. So like most of the socialist websites, their traffic went down by over 60% after the algorithm changes.
Holy shit.
Chris Hedges said every single site that posts his articles went down by more than 50%.
It's crazy. It's amazing how much power they have to just like flip a switch basically. And
Well, they do
control
it
what
for.
people see.
I heard it's on the right too. It's
Well, they do. It's anything
radical.
they consider fringy.
Yeah,
But that's not a matter of radical or extremist. It's just saying, okay, here's the bubble of what is currently okay based off the current status quo and power structure.
Yeah,
Anything that challenges that is considered radical and not okay.
And
that's like the opposite of a democracy.
Totally.
You're supposed to be able to always challenge what exists and come up with new ideas and new discussion.
Yeah, and that's exactly the problem with having these giant monopolies that are not beholden to anything.
Yeah.
Is that they can do that kind of thing, and there's nothing we can do about
And
it.
it will impact a huge amount of the public arena.
Exactly. It's more and more.
Yeah. Oh, there was something else I was going to say, but I forgot. Anyway.
Well, psychologically, that's bad too, because it's the whole idea of like political correctness kind of idea that like can get into the point of like denying freedom of speech, because as that goes along in time, it's like people are gonna be like, if they're funneled towards a certain way of thinking, it's like they're gonna be even less. They're gonna get more, I guess, structured around that way of thinking.
Yeah.
And so any small change is going to feel like a huge change,
Yeah.
right? So that I think is really interesting because it like sensitizes everyone too. It's like it leads to more of that emotional like argumentation where it's like those tactics, those manipulation tactics are even more useful and powerful.
Yeah. It's a complex issue. I mean, it really does violate the very principle of the freedom of speech, which is, I think, the most important thing, is the principle itself.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, which is the idea that the only way to have an active democratic discourse is if anyone can say anything, as long as it's, like, not direct threats of violence and that kind of shit, where it's like, oh, okay, there's this small exception, but...
Totally. And it's a tricky thing to start to legislate because it's, the one of the mistakes a lot of people, or like misattributions I think a lot of people have with the Bill of Rights, is that it's not only about limiting the government. Like, it's supposed to limit other things too.
Yeah.
So like when people see that YouTube is censoring stuff, they're like, oh, that's freedom. Like, how can they do that? Bill of Rights. Well, it's like, oh, well, that's a private company. They can do what they want, right? But it's important, I think, when it becomes such a powerful force like it has been, that it almost needs to be under the government's control so that it can be beholden to those things.
Right.
In some respect, at least. It's hard, but it's hard to say because it becomes this whole like almost communistic idea of this business got big and now we're taking it from you, or we're gonna oversee it now because it's so important, and that has a lot of authoritarian tendrils in it.
See, that's why I prefer less direct forms of channeling that. So things like, you pass a law saying, these particular companies have to abide by the freedom of speech because they're making them a public utility, so you regulate them more, but not actually taking them over.
Yeah.
Or, democratizing them, having their employees control it, while simultaneously giving certain regulations about, freedom of speech, that kind of stuff. Direct government control, I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah, that's really slippery slope.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think that's the only way to do it, is to regulate, and then you can talk about, democratizing a company.
Yeah.
It's just like I think it's weird for me because it's like I feel as though so many people like compartmentalize a lot in like how we as a nation like work. It's like, how are you compartmentalizing like the economy and the government?
Yeah.
Like, how are you not putting those things together? Because like the whole idea of the Bill of Rights wasn't like, oh yeah, how do we like make a good government? It was like, how do we live a good life? Like, if we are saying that government is supposed to regulate everyone's lives, which is like, collectively it's like, okay, well, we're all agreeing that this is a law, we need to follow this law, we need to adhere by this law, so that's what regulation
See, but
is.
I actually like the compartmentalization because I like having those different arenas that kind of check and balance each other, which is sort of like, the fundamental way our government is made is a series of checks and balances.
Well, they check what I'm like. They check themselves. It's not like don't create different categories. Like, it's kind of like the same thing as like, okay, you have your job and you have your like regular life, quote unquote. It's like, no, you have your life, and then you have your time spent at home and you have your time spent at work. You shouldn't have to like become a different person in order to do this.
I agree with you, but I think the reason you have to become a different person is because you enter an authoritarian structure.
Yeah.
In which case you lose parts of your freedom, which is why I think, democratic workplace would extend that, that democratic culture that we're supposed to have in our private lives to our public life as well. It needs to be reciprocal and non-contradictory.
Totally, but I think that idea that you just said is because of the compartmentalization. It's because you feel as though when you enter a workplace, you lose something rather than you exchanging something.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of perspective. I think it's a material reality. I mean, you have
I
to
agree.
abide by that environment in order to, keep your job and keep feeding yourself and keep paying rent.
Well, yeah, but it is a perspective thing. We're neither of the ways we spoke of like changes what happens, but it changes like the reasons why you're doing it. The idea is that
are you saying people should go to their job and just not have a perspective of like, I can't do what I want,
no.
What do you mean?
Okay, this is what I'm like. I don't want to get the idea that what is in place right now is good. I don't want that.
Okay.
But what I want to say is that they need to change their perspective so that they are making a decision, not feeling as though they have to do it. It's like, you might go to a workplace where you can't do certain things for a little while, but you need to, as a person, say, that's okay, because that bigger thing that's happening right now that I'm becoming a part of, that company that's doing some greater good that I wouldn't be able to do by myself, I'm willing to give up whatever that was, whatever the thing is that I dropped, so that I can contribute to that.
But that has to be willingly, which
Exactly.
means the business or the institution that you're entering is something you believe in.
Right, I agree.
And I don't think that can happen within an authoritarian structure.
No, I would agree.
So, I mean,
It
can, but I think for the most part it doesn't.
Right.
Obviously, you can be someone who just kind of, is into that, and it's like, I bow down behind, to the altar of power, and I think it's good power, and I'm going to follow it.
It's not.
As long as you, if going into the whole thing of like a company you believe in, for instance,
Right.
you could be working for a company that has a visionary leading.
Yeah, and you
that
believe
is
with the
doing-
vision and all that.
Exactly.
I think the vast majority of the time, that's not going to be the case.
I agree.
And I think it would be far more the case if businesses were run by their employees. Because they could actually have say in directing that vision.
Right.
They'd have a stake in it.
Makes
They'd
sense.
feel like they're part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, I would agree with that. The only reason why I wanted the change of perspective is so that people can really see what is occurring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
I
like
almost want that perspective of, I'm going here and I don't have control over this to increase, but in a sense of like acknowledging that and saying, but that's unacceptable and we have to change it.
I worry that is focusing too much on the negative. I don't think that's a complete picture.
I agree that it's not a complete picture, but I think it would spur action and the desire to change things. I think anger is intense in terms of like righteous indignation and a sense of what's happening around me is unacceptable. I think that's a good thing. I agree that it's negative, but I think it's generative of change. I think it's the same thing that made us go, fuck the king, let's have a revolution. Let's form a democratic republic. I think it's the same. Those things come from that. This is unacceptable and we have to change it. It has to include a positive aspect where you ground yourself in what's important, that you are feeling like you're lacking.
Yeah.
A redefining of what you'd like to see and
Exactly.
presenting a vision of a better future.
No, exactly.
But those two things have to go together. You can't just have one or the other.
No, I agree.
You need that anger, that indignation, that fuck this is unacceptable, I'm being oppressed.
Yeah.
And you also need, we're human beings, we're better than that, these are our values, this is what we should be living for.
I would definitely say on an emotional aspect, you're totally right.
Which I think is what most people function on.
Well,
When you have a movement that changes things, I think
yeah.
the majority of
no, I would agree
people
with. Okay, yeah.
are primarily driven by their emotions. And
No,
it's
and I
like,
can agree
you're
with
going to
that.
present logical points that they're going to agree with and attach their emotional sentiments to.
Yeah.
But the engine is
Well, yeah,
still
exactly.
emotion.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is, like, I'm not saying that, like, what you're, like, saying is, like, bad, but again, it's one of those things where it's like, I worry that is going to, again, lead to the same situation where we are now, where things aren't, like, elucidated. They're not actually, like...
So you're worried that we'll have the emotion without the logic.
Yeah, and then what happens is people
Right.
don't have the logic anymore, and then they have to rely on the emotion, and then if they're in a stable situation,
Yeah.
for a little bit, they will become stabilized, and then they'll
Right.
forget.
Right. I
Because
agree with you.
that's natural. That's
I
a
agree with
human. That's a human thing to
I
be
agree
like.
with you. Where
there's
the
no
emotion
problem.
is going to be there either way.
Yes, exactly. That's
you
why I
have
don't
to-
worry about it.
Well, I worry about it in the sense that it needs to be attached to the right things.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of emotion
Well,
gets
yeah, I mean, I agree with that.
misdirected into unproductive channels.
Mhm.
So you need to be like, your emotion is correct.
Mhm.
It's good that you feel this way because you're responding to a reality.
Right.
But let us now elucidate that reality.
Right.
What is the reality?
Right.
Attach your emotions to concrete things.
Right.
And present a vision of what we want to change.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but it's kind of like for me. I think of it in like a relationship aspect too. It's like when you go to a company, you have to make sure that you're thinking of it as like this is a relationship that you're forming with this entity. You're not just like
Right.
this is my slave owner for now. It's like no, you need to like say these are my boundaries.
Right.
And if you infringe on these boundaries, just like you would with any relationship, it's like that's not okay.
See, but that I think only works if you exist within a system where there's plenty of relationship opportunities and plenty of healthy relationships available. And if it's really hard to find relationships, as in an association with a business, that is healthy, but you still need to do this to survive, then there's no other option than to think of it in those terms.
Right, and I guess that's the thing that I would like people to also get to the point of, is if that's the case.
Yeah.
If you literally look around and you say, I cannot find a healthy relationship,
Yeah.
that's the place where I get, like, I will be 100% behind you in the whole revolt thing. It's like, if you look
And I think
around
that's
and you're
the
literally like...
existence of the majority of American people. That's what I think.
Okay, well, I don't...
And I base that off of...
I would have to think about that.
We'll have to come back and have another segment about this, where
Yeah.
we can bring in the statistics of, like,
Totally.
the average American economically and mental health and all these different things. But my view currently is that is where we are. Where the average American
pretty
is
crazy.
largely in despair.
Wow.
That's what I think.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So...
Damn. That's a fucking huge bummer. I would have to look into that for sure.
And it's not like I like that, but that's just
Yeah.
where I believe we are.
Yeah.
So, to me, that does equal ding, 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 time to revolt.
Yeah. It's just so messy and chaotic.
Yeah, it's a bummer. It's a big bummer. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand and make that not the case,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
But
Well, not a physical revolution, right?
no, only though
It
because
doesn't have to be bloody.
I believe that would be an ineffective tactic anyway. I think
Yeah.
the only way to have a real revolution in today's world is a non-violent one that's based on, serious civil disobedience and just simply shutting down the whole infrastructure and demanding real change.
I guess, yeah, and I 100% agree with that, because I always do think of, like, when I hear revolt, I do think of, like, the physical one.
Yeah, I think that's no longer valid within a modern context.
And I totally agree. I would
And
say.
I mean, you're not going to beat the state with violence.
Right.
That's the game they want to play.
I guess one of the things, though, is that I want to, if you look around and you can't see any healthy relationships, I want someone to, I would wish that people would take on the responsibility of creating a healthy relationship. And the only way you can do that is if you know what that is.
Right. But again, there's systemic obstacles in place that make it difficult for you to get a foothold.
Right. We're talking in the,
So we're talking
this is now this is for now, like, the revolution kind of thing.
Right. Well, and that is what we're talking about. Like, what would be a healthy relationship?
Yeah.
In my mind, currently, that's democratic cooperatives.
Totally.
Would be certainly a far healthier relationship.
Yeah.
Because there's give and take.
Oh,
There's
100,
accountability.
I would 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
I think, like, the idea too would be like how exchanges go on if you're in a revolution, because that I think is really difficult.
See, that's interesting too, and there's a lot of that's a whole nother segment. There's a lot of potential there, because I mean, there's a lot of revolutionary communities in terms of so I think it's Jackson, Mississippi. I could totally be wrong. But there's a community where it's, primarily black people who, the economy's shit, they faced, serious persecution in that community because there's a lot of blatant racism and all that shit.
Mm-hmm.
And they've formed their own kind of, counterculture community where they've bought huge tracts of land by pooling resources for their own use.
Mm-hmm.
They do things called timeshare, where it's like you identify the skills everyone in your community has, and instead of trading money for services, you trade service for service.
Next, yeah.
So, it's like, Jimmy went and fixed Bob's porch, so now Fred is going to go do this for him.
Totally.
And it's just kind of like this exchange of service.
Yeah.
And so that's a revolutionary idea. It's completely overthrowing the basis of relations that currently exists for an alternative.
Well, and I think that also, for me, the biggest thing that comes to mind there is it also completely changes the economy too.
Yeah.
And I think in a very, very good way, where you try to, because money's always been an issue for me, because I feel like it's such an easy way to get corrupted. But you look at the premises for money, and you're like, okay, well, I can see why it's good, because you can't grow corn every fucking season. You have to be able to sell your corn, and
money
then
is very useful as an exchange.
But what I'm saying is that you get those premises of why you need money, and now if we look again at money, it's wait, do we really need money? What is that? Because you're talking about exchanging services, and you say, well, you can't grow food all the time. It's now we can.
Yeah.
So now if someone just can go down to the food making place and then go make some food for a little bit, and then they can get something else from it, it's
See, now you're talking communism. To each according to his need, and from each according to his ability.
I would have to look into that kind of.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that's a bad. I mean, we're talking the theory of communism as opposed to the reality that came about of government control.
And I'm not 100% even saying right now that I think that money would not have its place, because we've talked about that before, you and I, where we think that there should be the idea would be two different types of money, but more on there should be one that is about for resources that you need to survive, and then there's something that for more of the luxury type stuff.
A two-track economy, one for necessities, one for non-commodities.
And that's probably what I would say is that would be the next step for that.
So I've thought in a similar way. I didn't use money for it. I just thought in terms of okay, so you make the money economy better by democratizing it.
Yeah.
Then you use government to provide the basic necessities of life.
Totally.
And I don't even necessarily mean food. Maybe food. You're starving, sure. But I was thinking more healthcare, education, really basic public housing that's available at a really affordable rate, shit like that.
Totally.
Where it's you make that floor of basic life dignity for everyone.
Yeah.
And then, once you have that bare minimum of acceptable living standard, then everything else is a matter of, competition and variable and marketplace interaction and all that shit.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, the thing with the government thing, with the government just, giving you the like the necessities, I totally want to, but I was thinking about that today actually, and it's just difficult because you still have to account for the people who are making that happen, and
What do you
is
mean?
that like for the individuals who are like doing the work that requires getting the like resources to the people. So unless we like robotically do all of that, then maybe then at that
Well, do you
point-
mean, are you talking like things like food now, or are you talking like
Well, let's
healthcare,
just- okay,
education?
Yeah, I mean healthcare and education. If we do healthcare, how are you going to pay the doctors?
Well, with that, I mean, just taking the Medicare for All example that's
Yeah.
currently being discussed
Uh-huh.
is, it's something paid for by our taxes.
Right.
We pay the government our taxes.
Right.
Businesses do,
Yeah.
it's progressive, obviously.
Right.
And then you still have private doctors, and the government pays them the bill from that tax fund. And then the government lowers prices, since the doctors only get their money from the government. The pharmaceuticals only get their money from the government.
Okay.
There's one source
Yeah.
of the money.
Right.
And therefore there's a fuck ton of leverage. I mean, think of it as like a labor union, except it's literally all of labor.
Totally.
And so they can negotiate to lower prices. They can be like, no, you're charging too much. You have nowhere else to go, so you're going to charge less.
Yeah.
So it keeps it affordable. And I mean, that incentive, the profit's still there. It's not going to be as egregious, but...
The only thing I worry, I think actually healthcare is probably the most complex one. I think with water, it's like a pretty easy thing, and with food, I think it's a pretty easy thing. Yeah. But I think the only reason why I think it's difficult with medical is just because there is a skill level there. I don't think it's very skill-oriented to get water places, and I don't think it's skill-oriented.
What about a Medicare for All system, for example, would make it difficult in terms of like getting that skill level from the doctors? Like, why is that harder than what we currently have?
I think it's difficult because doctors can charge, and hospitals too, can charge whatever they want because they, well, quote unquote, it's difficult. There's so much corruption going on right now,
Right.
so I'm just going to go into like what I think like is the structure that they're talking about regardless of the corruption. But like it would be like if you have a doctor who is better at performing surgery, it's like that has a better like life percentage or whatever, people coming out alive and like healthy and done well.
Yeah.
They would ultimately get paid more than a doctor who is like, he was able to get through med school and stuff, but he does have like a lower percentage, or like maybe you are more scarred, or you're more, there's like he's not as good in
Right.
that way. So in that, I think that they try to say, okay, well, this doctor who is like a better doctor, quote unquote, a better doctor is a more skilled doctor, gets to be paid more than the one who's not.
Right.
And so I think that if the case would be that like it's healthcare for all, it would have to be that internally they were able to assess skill level, and then that those doctors were getting paid more.
Well, I think that would likely come out in terms... There's probably a couple ways you could do that. I mean, first of all, there's going to be the more skilled doctors can do the more difficult things.
Mm-hmm.
And those things are going to cost more. So they can pay that doctor more. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
Because like, there's going to be a higher bill for like some hardcore mega surgery than there is for like a checkup.
Right, but not maybe for resources.
What do you mean?
Maybe it's like if we just say that like but the surgeries are time intensive, it's just there's like the more difficult thing is like maybe a procedure has to be is like it's a harder procedure because there's a greater chance for a screw up,
Yeah.
right? Literally all you're doing is it's not based on the materials needed to conduct that surgery, but it's purely based on if a doctor can do it. You know what I mean? So like you're putting skill into the resources. That's what I'm just saying is like it's difficult. That's why it becomes more difficult, because it's like you're gonna have to account for different skill levels, not from just like the materials used, but also just like the person. And so
Right.
I don't know. I think it can become difficult to assess that. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that's why it's more complex than something about like getting water places.
Right.
Or someone who delivers
How do you
food.
compensate the more skilled workers in
Yeah.
something like medical?
exactly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's that compensation issue, but there's also I think what is a more important issue, which is that skill being used to service the needs of regular people.
Right.
Because like when we look at our medical system compared to like other Western countries, you know, we have some of the best medical equipment and knowledge in the world, but that generally doesn't serve the average population. Our average outcomes are actually worse than in Europe, and our average costs are way higher.
Yeah.
So we're paying more for less.
Right.
And we go, oh, well, we'll look at these amazing doctors and technology we have. It's like, okay, well, are those just serving the wealthy? Is that all they're doing? Because the average person's getting shit.
Right.
So,
Right.
how important is your skill if it's not helping people?
Well, there's certainly a lot of incentive to not go to the doctor when it's a bunch of money.
Exactly.
And I think that's a lot. That has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
People just aren't going when they need to, and then by the time they go, things are way worse.
It's way worse.
So
Absolutely.
my thing is, are doctors getting paid too much? Or is there something in between where we get like hospitals who are charging too much and then still paying their doctors not enough?
Right.
So like that's why I'm saying, like that's why it's more complex, I guess. You know, it's because it's like if we're saying something's fucked up in that system, right?
Yeah.
People are not being able to go to the doctors because they cost too much money. So if it costs too much money, then we have to figure out who's fucking up in that.
Yeah. Well.
Is it the doctors who are getting paid too much, or is it the
Well,
hospitals that are charging
a big
too much?
combination. I mean, pharmaceuticals are way more expensive here. You know, hospitals way more expensive. Doctors way more expensive. I mean, it's everything.
Totally.
It's a huge, complex of money making.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I think is really interesting too. Again, like it comes to either the intellectual or the skill value. That
Better give that puppy some attention, Drew.
I know, right? Like, yeah, you're right there. It's like this. It's skill or intellectual, like I guess quote unquote profit or something like that. That we haven't really figured out.
Yeah.
Because like for pharmaceuticals, it's like okay, you're making a medicine, great. You're maybe curing a crazy ass disease. That's awesome too. But for some reason, you think people should need to pay $400 a pill for it, and that's like, I mean, I get that you're saving everyone's life, and that's fucking wonderful, but you're being a dick about it. So, like, what do you do there? You know?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting issue because it does cost an inordinate amount of money to develop a drug and get it to the market in our economy.
Yeah.
And so there may be a lot of problems with that sort of thing because we want there to be enough incentive for those drug companies to actually go through all of that rigmarole. And so it's important that they get the payout at the end in some way, like so that incentive exists. And I'm not saying that fronting, like that cost onto the consumer is the best way to do it, because then you end up as like this sort of not merchant of death, but you're selling people something that they basically have to buy or die, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a shitty situation, but
it's not really a market because there's no choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But by the same token, I think it's important that we have that incentive there. So.
Right. Well, but then the question comes about: should we leave that as a market? So if we're paying the cost anyway, why don't we just directly fund research through the government?
See, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Because I think we'll save more money that way anyway. And now we can publicly decide where we want to be spending our research.
Totally.
And I think with something like medicine, that kind of direction for research is probably more important than profit making as an incentive. I mean, what incentive is there in a profit market to cure cancer?
That's a good point. Although
there's not, or else we would have one.
Well, I don't know about that, but
no, there is plenty of money that's going to different places to make a different drug.
I think it's fair to say
curing the same disease.
We'd be making a lot more progress on these root health problems.
Okay, fine, whatever.
We don't know if we would have cured it by now, but yeah.
I'm saying there's a lot of resources going to just creating the same exact cure in a slightly different way so that they can patent it and then sell that for
and
just
we target the symptoms, not the disease, and
it just for something like medicine where it is you're dealing with biochemical processes. It's like we don't need a gajillion different types of things unless we're talking antibiotics, where you have a different disease and they have a different like biochemical structure, and so you have to do it. It's like there is a very material like engineering function that's occurring that we don't need to have 20 different waters. We can have one water. We can have the same thing for a pill for like a disorder like creating insulin for those with diabetes. It's like you don't need to create 20 different types of insulin.
For those who cannot see, we're laughing because my dog is jumping on Sean and Drew with great affection.
So what you're saying is that you think that healthcare, or at least pharmaceuticals, are purposefully redundant.
Yeah, definitely.
I
For
think
profit.
that happens, but I also think that it's less often than it seems like you are making it out to be. I think there's a lot of that in the cancer drugs, but I also think that that's partly because we're getting slightly better at targeting them, not necessarily because they're the same thing. So I think that's a little bit of an oversimplification.
What would be the idea of, like, why we think we need to have, like, a ton of different companies selling aspirin?
Well, I think it's good to have multiple companies selling the same drug.
Well,
because
actually,
that's
that
what
brings the
drives
cost
prices
down.
Exactly.
But we actually have laws in place that like stop that in a lot of cases. So, like for example, we're not allowed to import drugs from other countries, even if it's the same name brand. So, like right now there are name brand drugs in Canada that cost like 1/10 as much,
Right.
and we're not allowed to import them to artificially keep prices high here.
Well, there's also probably something to do with the different testing procedures and some.
But they're the same drug that's cleared here. It's literally the same brand.
I'm just saying there is, I think, many more ethical reasons to do something like medicine than there needs to be for profit. I think that, like, if we had there can be social reasons to become a doctor or a pharmaceutical. You don't need, like, if you're someone who cures, like, suffering, you get societal.
So you think it should be more in the realm of public servant, like a teacher or a police officer?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. I'm
What
not
do you think,
saying
Dwight?
that-
You know more about this area than anyone here.
Well, I think that the problem with that is it's a little too high-minded for the world that we live in. Ultimately, people want to better their own lives
fair.
in a lot of ways. And sure, it's nice when you can do that and better other people's lives at the same time. But if you want the best doctors, then you need to give them the best incentive to be good and to become that doctor, or they're going to find something else. A lot of them will.
It depends, yeah.
A lot of them will. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so, yes, there will always be those people that are going into that because they just want to help people,
Yeah.
and they'll do their shit as well as they can because that's what they love. But I think you're also going to miss out on a lot of people that would have been great doctors
Right.
if they just had a little push from, getting extra money or getting whatever other incentive. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't socially reward them. Obviously we should, and I think that we do to a certain degree. Doctors have a certain amount of revere in our society.
Prestige.
But I do think it's important to keep the incentives multifaceted. Have lots of them.
Don't even do anything.
That's the problem, Sean. She wants cuddles so bad.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes difficult because I think that when you're trying to, like, structure this kind of thing, it's like, where are you trying to... If people are born with the ability to become a doctor, and the idea is how do we get them to become a doctor because doctors are important, I think it doesn't need to be through economic ways to entice them to become a doctor. I think if that's true, then we haven't clearly identified why it's important to become a doctor. I think if you literally feel as though the only reason why you're doing it is for the money, I think that you are very you're misunderstanding the difficulty of, like, suffering.
Well, sure. I don't think it should. I feel like very few doctors go in only for the money, but
Yeah.
I do think that it's important that it's there because that does entice them to go through all of the shit that they have to go through to become a doctor.
Totally.
Because they know that at the end of it, they'll be doing a job that will provide for what the lifestyle that they want,
Right.
and will also be helping people that they can feel good about.
Totally.
And so that's a nice intersection of things that people like. But, in the life that we live right now, in the place that we're at economically, I think it's kind of... It's people have to balance those things. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can.
Eating too much breakfast.
No donut for me today. So anyway, I think it's important. So basically, I think everybody, as they're trying to decide what they're going to do with their life, has to sort of balance those things. It's kind of like we were talking about the other day. It's like we have things that we need to balance in our life. Like, what do we want to get out of our life, and what parts of that do we need to get out of our job? And then there's always the baseline of, at least, you know, the way things are structured now, we have to consider whatever job we're doing is going to be our, you know, livelihood. So how much livelihood, quote unquote, do we need, and what can we do that will provide enough? Yeah. So I understand where you're coming from in that, like, we shouldn't necessarily have to have any more incentive than saving lives is awesome, but just that's not the world that we live in now. You know, and if we can get to a point where that was all that was needed, you know, where everyone, but I just feel like the point, like, at which that happens is so far away from now that it's almost not worth talking about at the moment. You know what I mean? Where it's just like there's so many things that we would need to have in place for it to be just a choice.
Literally, like, I think literally all we would have to do is just create a medical structure, a medical school that was put on by the government, that was headed by the best the best medical teachers, that we gave them good compensation.
And then make it, like, free to go to medical school?
Yeah! Because if you feel like they have to go through so much, it's like, yeah, intellectually, you got to be a smart motherfucker to be able to be a doctor. You know, like, not just your rando person can become one.
Right.
But part of the reason why it's so fucking difficult is because these people have to go through, like, years and years of being, like, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt.
For sure.
And then hopefully be able to pay it when they're a doctor. So fuck that noise. That's like a ton of stress that doesn't even need to be there if we actually think that doctors are important.
I mean, I'm all for free education. I think all education should be free.
Totally.
So,
Yeah. Agreed.
but yeah,
it's certainly worth it in the long run. You're
Agreed.
getting more from your investment than you're spending.
Oh, yeah.
It's just not even a question.
Undeniably better.
Well, I mean, we learned that was like this big thing. So after World War II, we had, I forget what it was called. There was some bill that made it so every veteran from World War II got free college, the GI Bill, got free college education. And at that time, that was a huge chunk of the population. Because, I mean, the draft and all that jazz.
Right, yeah.
And they did research on, you know, how much are we getting in terms of economic growth from these people going to college, getting this education.
Totally.
And I don't know the exact number, but it was significantly more than the investment. And they used it as this big validation, like, oh, this was a good idea and it's worth it and it's decided and it's definitively understood that that's a good thing.
Right.
And then it's
And
like
then
we don't even double down on
We
that,
didn't
you know?
apply it,
Exactly.
Yeah.